Ma'am, I've had complaints about loitering.
I own this complex.
ID. Now, hands behind your back.
You're making a serious mistake.
At 2:14 p.m. outside Riverside Plaza Shopping Center, a white police officer forced handcuffs onto a black woman in full army dress uniform while shoppers stood frozen with their phones raised. The woman was Lieutenant Imani Kenyatta, an active duty Army logistics officer with 12 years of distinguished service and owner of the very shopping center where she now stood detained. The officer who put his hands on her, Brett Kavanaugh, and his silent partner Dalton Prout, had already decided based on her skin color and their own prejudice that she didn't belong in a place like this, possibly own it. One of them would later be heard on body cam saying, "She doesn't look like someone who could afford a place like this, probably casing it for someone else." 18 minutes later, 3 law firms were on conference calls. The Army's Inspector General had been notified, and local news crews were rushing to the scene with a story that would force a department to answer for what those 2 officers had done in broad daylight in front of 40 witnesses. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the next story is one you don't want to miss. Officer Brett Kavanaugh was 42 years old and had been with the Metro County Police Department for almost 8 years. He was known among some colleagues as thorough, a label that in his case meant making assumptions first and asking questions later, especially in affluent neighborhoods where he believed certain people didn't belong. Business owners had quietly complained about him stopping black customers outside their stores, asking for ID and proof of purchase without cause. A dispatcher had once noted in an internal email that Kavanaugh seemed to have a radar for people he thinks are out of place. 3 formal complaints had been filed against him in 5 years. All 3 were marked unfounded or unsubstantiated after brief internal reviews. His partner, Officer Dalton Prout, 29, 3 years on the job, rarely spoke up during stops. He stayed a step behind, took notes when told, and ran IDs without asking why. Prout had learned early that questioning Kavanaugh's instincts led to tension in the patrol car and cold shoulders at shift change. So he followed the lead, backed the calls, and told himself he was just doing his job. That afternoon, Kavanaugh sat in his patrol car near the main entrance of Riverside Plaza, window down, watching the lunch crowd thin out. Shoppers walked to their cars with bags. Business executives checked their phones. A few teenagers waited for rides near the coffee shop. His eyes landed on one woman in particular. Lieutenant Imani Kenyatta, 34, walked through the plaza parking lot in her Army service uniform, a leather portfolio under one arm, her key fob in the other hand. Her stride was confident, unhurried. The ribbons above her left pocket showed deployment to Kuwait, an Army Achievement Medal, and a Meritorious Service Medal. She had spent the morning at Fort Belvoir in a logistics planning session and had driven directly to Riverside Plaza for her quarterly property inspection, a routine she had maintained for 3 years since her family's real estate company acquired the shopping center. She was scheduled to meet with the property management company at 3:00 p.m. to review upcoming lease renewals and discuss a proposal for renovating the North Wing. She had reviewed tenant financials that morning and wanted to walk the grounds herself before the meeting, something her father had taught her to always do. Never rely only on reports, he told her. Walk your properties, talk to your tenants, know what's really happening. As Kenyatta approached the main entrance, checking her phone for a text from her property manager, Kavanaugh stepped out of his patrol car. "Excuse me, hold on a second." Kenyatta looked up, saw the uniform and stopped. "Yes, officer." Kavanaugh walked toward her, one hand resting on his belt. "What's your business here today?" Kenyatta's expression remained professional, but her pulse quickened slightly. "I'm here for a meeting. I own this property." Kavanaugh's eyes narrowed. "You own this property?" "Yes, sir, through my family's company. I'm conducting my quarterly inspection." Kavanaugh glanced back at Prout, who had now stepped out of the car. "You got some ID?" "Of course." Kenyatta reached carefully into her portfolio. "I have my military ID, my driver's license, and the property deed documentation is in my car if you need." "Let's start with the ID." Lieutenant Imani Kenyatta pushed through the glass doors of Riverside Plaza at exactly 2:03 p.m., the afternoon sun catching the polished brass of her army insignia. She had made this walk dozens of times, clipboard in hand, portfolio tucked under her arm, comfortable flats replacing the heels she'd worn to Fort Belvoir that morning. The plaza was hers, not in some abstract investment sense, but truly hers. She knew which tiles in the food court needed replacing, which storefront had the faulty air conditioning unit, and which tenant always paid early. Mrs. Kenyatta, the voice came from the dry cleaning shop near the entrance. Yosef Abadi, a 58-year-old Israeli immigrant who'd been leasing the corner unit for 6 years, waved from behind his counter. "The new steam press is perfect. Thank you for approving it so fast." Kenyatta smiled and changed direction toward his shop. "Of course, Mr. Abadi, a broken press means lost business. Lost business means I don't get my rent," she grinned. "How's Sarah doing with the new scheduling system?" "She loves it, says she can finally take Sundays off." He leaned on the counter. "You want I should press that uniform? You have a meeting, yes?" "At 3, and no thank you, I'll manage." She glanced at her clipboard. "I'm just doing my quarterly walkthrough, making sure everything's up to standard." "Everything is good. You run a tight ship, Lieutenant." Kenyatta continued down the corridor, noting the newly installed LED lighting, energy efficient, brighter, better for security. She paused outside Java Junction, the coffee shop that had just renewed for another 3 years. Through the window she could see Keisha Morrison, the owner, training a new barista on the espresso machine. Keisha looked up, caught Kenyatta's eye, and gave her a quick thumbs up. Business was good. The fitness center at the far end was her newest tenant, only 8 months into a 5-year lease. She made a mental note to check if they needed any modifications to the ventilation system. Heavy use, lots of body heat, the HVAC would need. "Excuse me, hold on a second." The voice came from behind her, authoritative and sharp. Kenyatta turned to see a white police officer, mid-40s, stocky build, walking toward her with purpose. His hand rested on his belt near his radio. A younger officer trailed a few steps behind, watching but not speaking. Kenyatta's military training kicked in immediately. "Assess, comply, de-escalate." "Yes, officer." Officer Brett Kavanaugh stopped about 6 feet away, his eyes scanning her uniform, then her face, then the clipboard. "What's your business here today?" The question hung in the air, not "can I help you?" Not "are you looking for someone?" but "what's your business here?" Kenyatta kept her voice steady. "I'm here for a meeting. I own this property." Kavanaugh's eyebrows rose slightly. Behind him, Officer Prout shifted his weight. "You own this property?" Kavanaugh repeated, his tone flat. "Yes, sir, through my family's real estate investment company. I'm conducting my quarterly inspection before my meeting with the property management firm." Kavanaugh glanced at Prout, then back at Kenyatta. Someone called in about suspicious activity, someone walking around, taking notes, looking in windows. Kenyatta's pulse quickened, but her face remained calm. 12 years in the army had taught her how to handle confrontation. "I understand. That would be me. I'm the owner, and I'm inspecting my property. I do this every quarter." "Right," Kavanaugh stepped closer. "You got some ID?" "Of course." Kenyatta carefully set her clipboard on a nearby bench and reached into her leather portfolio. "I have my military ID, my Virginia driver's license, and I can get the property deed documents from my car if you need them." "Let's start with the ID." She pulled out her military identification card and her driver's license, handing them to Kavanaugh with steady hands. He took them, studied them for a long moment, his eyes moving from the photo to her face and back again. "Army, her?" "Yes, sir, 12 years. Currently stationed at Fort Belvoir Logistics Corps." Kavanaugh turned the military ID over in his hands. "And you say you own this shopping center?" "My family's company owns it, yes. Kenyatta Properties, LLC. We acquired it 3 years ago for $18 million. We also own 3 other commercial properties in the region." The number seemed to hang in the air. 18 million. Kavanaugh's jaw tightened slightly. What Lieutenant Kenyatta didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Brett Kavanaugh had been waiting for a call like this all morning. Not specifically about her, but about someone. Anyone who would give him a reason to exercise the authority he felt slipping away in a department that had recently hired a new chief who talked about community policing and implicit bias training. Kavanaugh had joined Metro County Police 8 years earlier after washing out of a neighboring department for what they called attitude issues with supervision. Metro County had been desperate for officers and hadn't looked too closely at his file. He'd spent those 8 years building a reputation as thorough, persistent, and unwilling to let things slide. He worked the commercial districts, the shopping centers, the business parks, places where he believed people needed watching. His first complaint had come in year 2. A black businessman accused Kavanaugh of detaining him outside his own office building, refusing to believe he worked there despite showing his employee badge. Internal Affairs had marked it unsubstantiated after a brief review. The businessman's attorney had pushed, but the case went nowhere. The second complaint came in year 4. An Indian family shopping at a department store said Kavanaugh followed them for 20 minutes, eventually stopping them in the parking lot and demanding to see their receipts. Again, Internal Affairs cleared him. Officer exercised reasonable discretion based on observed behavior. The third complaint, just 18 months ago, came from a black woman who'd been visiting her sister at a medical office complex. Kavanaugh had stopped her in the lobby, asked for ID, and questioned why she was there. When she explained she was visiting family, he told her she didn't look like the usual visitors and asked if she was sure she was in the right building. That complaint had been marked unfounded after Kavanaugh wrote in his report that he'd been responding to concerns about loitering. 3 complaints, 3 dismissals, and a growing sense that the rules were protecting the wrong people. That morning, Kavanaugh had been parked near Riverside Plaza's entrance when the call came through. Report of suspicious activity, Riverside Plaza, individual taking notes near storefronts, possibly casing locations. The caller hadn't left a name. The dispatcher noted it as anonymous, but it was enough. Kavanaugh had seen Kenyatta walk into the plaza at 2:03 p.m. He'd watched her stop at the dry cleaner, talk to the owner, continue down the corridor. The uniform had caught his attention immediately, not because it looked fake, it didn't, but because it didn't fit the profile he'd built in his mind of who belonged in a place like this in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. He'd turned to Prut. "You see her?" Prut had glanced up, the woman in the army uniform. "Yeah, walking around with a clipboard, looking in windows, matches the call." Prut had hesitated. "She's in uniform, could be official business." Kavanaugh had shaken his head. Could be someone who thinks wearing a uniform means no one asks questions. He'd opened his car door. Come on. Now standing in the corridor holding Kenyatta's military ID, Kavanaugh felt the familiar sensation of control. This was his jurisdiction, his stop, his call. Kenyatta watched Kavanaugh examine her IDs, her military training warring with her rising frustration. She could see it in his eyes, the doubt, the suspicion, the refusal to accept what was directly in front of him. "Officer, if you'd like to verify my credentials, you can call the property management company. Their number is on the sign near the main entrance, or I can show you the property deed. It's in my car." Kavanaugh handed the IDs back to her slowly. "Anyone can print these off the internet." The words hit like a slap. Kenyatta felt her face flush. "Excuse me." "Military IDs, driver's licenses. I've seen fakes before, pretty convincing ones." Kenyatta's voice remained steady, but an edge crept in. "Officer, that's an official Department of Defense common access card with embedded security features and a digitally encoded chip. It's not something you print off the internet." Kavanaugh crossed his arms. "So you say?" "So the United States Army says." Kenyatta pulled out her phone carefully, keeping her movements visible. "I can call my commanding officer at Fort Belvoir right now if you'd like to verify." "Put the phone away." "Officer Kavanaugh," she read his name tag deliberately. "I'm trying to cooperate. I've shown you my identification. I've explained my purpose here. What else do you need? I need you to stop acting like you're running this situation. Behind Kavanaugh, Prout shifted uncomfortably. Brett, maybe we should just. I've got this, Dalton. Kavanaugh kept his eyes on Kenyatta. Ma'am, you're going to need to come with me while we sort this out. Kenyatta's heart rate kicked up, but her voice stayed level. Sort what out? I've provided identification. I've explained who I am and why I'm here. On what grounds are you detaining me? I'm not detaining you. I'm asking you to cooperate with an investigation into a suspicious person call. I'd like to speak with your supervisor. My supervisor is busy. Then I'd like you to radio for them. That's my right. Kavanaugh's jaw clenched. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open with exaggerated slowness. Let's start over. Full name: Lieutenant Imani Kenyatta, United States Army. Address: is that relevant to whether or not I'm allowed to inspect my own property? Address: Kenyatta recited her address. Kavanaugh wrote it down, his pen pressing hard enough into the paper that she could hear it scratch. And you claim you own this shopping center? I don't claim it, I do own it. Through Kenyatta Properties LLC. Would you like me to show you the deed? That won't be necessary. Kavanaugh closed the notebook. Here's the thing, ma'am. I've been doing this job for 8 years. I've worked this plaza for 3 of those years, and in that time I've never seen you here, not once. I conduct quarterly inspections. And I've never seen any owner walking around with a clipboard in an army uniform, taking notes, looking in windows. That's not how property owners operate. They hire people for that. Kenyatta's hands tightened on her portfolio. Officer, I don't know what you think is happening here, but I'm trying to be respectful. I'm trying to follow your instructions, but you need to understand, I am the owner of this property. Those are my tenants. This is my quarterly inspection. I have every legal right to be here. Kavanaugh leaned in slightly. Do you have proof of that? Real proof? The deed is in my car. I'll get it right now. No, Kavanaugh's hand moved to his hip. You stay right here. The moment stretched thin. Around them, shoppers had started to notice. A woman near the coffee shop had her phone out, not even pretending she wasn't recording. 2 teenagers near the fitness center had stopped to watch. Yosef Abadi had stepped out of his dry cleaning shop, his face creased with concern. Kenyatta could feel the situation spiraling. Every instinct told her to stay calm, stay compliant, let it play out. But another part of her, the part that had commanded soldiers, the part that had built a business, the part that had earned every ribbon on her chest, was screaming that this was wrong. Officer Kavanaugh, I'm asking you again to call your supervisor. I want to speak with someone else about this situation. And I'm telling you again, we're going to sort this out right here. There's nothing to sort out. I've identified myself. I've explained my purpose. I haven't broken any laws. You're on this property under suspicious circumstances. This is MY property. The words came out louder than she intended. Kavanaugh's entire demeanor changed. His hand moved to his belt, and his voice dropped to the tone officers use right before things go physical. Ma'am, you need to calm down. I am calm, I'm also right, and you know it. Kavanaugh pulled his radio from his shoulder. Dispatch, this is Unit 34. I need another unit at Riverside Plaza. Subject is becoming agitated and non-compliant. Kenyatta's mind raced. Non-compliant, I've answered every question you've. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. The words froze her. What? Turn around, hands behind your back. You're being detained for providing false information to an officer and failing to cooperate with a lawful investigation. This is not lawful. I haven't provided any false information. Everything I've told you is. Turn around now, or I will turn you around. Kenyatta's breath came in short bursts. 12 years of military training told her to comply. Her pride, her sense of justice, her fury at what was happening told her to fight, but fighting would only make it worse. Fighting would become the story. Fighting would become the justification. She turned around slowly, her hands trembling as she brought them behind her back. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Around them, the crowd had grown. Someone gasped. Another phone came up. Yusuf Abadi took a step forward, his voice rising. "Officer, what are you doing? That's Mrs. Kenyatta. She owns this plaza." Kavanaugh didn't even look at him. "Sir, step back. She's the landlord. I pay her rent every month. Sir, if you don't step back, I'll have you removed from the premises." Kenyatta's voice came out tight, controlled by force of will. "Mr. Abadi, it's okay. Don't interfere. Just call my attorney. His number is in my phone. Call Marcus Chen." Kavanaugh guided her toward the exit, one hand on her arm, the cuffs pressing into her wrists. Prout followed, his face pale, saying nothing. As they passed Java Junction, Keisha Morrison burst through the door, her eyes wide with shock. "Lieutenant Kenyatta, what's happening?" "Ma'am, clear the area." Kavanaugh's voice was mechanical now, by the book. "She's my landlord. She owns this building. What are you arresting her for?" More voices joined in. The fitness center manager, Marcus Liu, stepped out into the corridor. "Officer, there's been a mistake. That's Lieutenant Kenyatta. She owns the plaza." Kavanaugh kept walking, his grip on Kenyatta's arm firm. "Everyone needs to disperse. This is police business." By the time they reached the main entrance, at least 15 people had gathered, most with phones out, all recording. The scene was surreal. A decorated army officer in full uniform, handcuffed, being escorted out of her own property by 2 white police officers while her tenants shouted that there'd been a mistake. But what Brett Kavanaugh didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that every second of this encounter was being captured not just by civilian cell phones, but by 6 high-definition security cameras positioned throughout the plaza. Cameras installed by a security company Kenyatta had personally hired. Cameras that recorded not just video, but crystal-clear audio. And on that audio, at timestamp 2:27:43 p.m., just before Kavanaugh handcuffed her, his voice could be heard speaking to Prout in a low tone he thought no one else would catch. "She doesn't look like someone who could own a place like this, probably casing it for someone else. You know how they do." The cameras had caught everything, and in 18 minutes, those recordings would be in the hands of an attorney who'd spent 15 years specializing in civil rights cases. The situation was about to explode in ways Brett Kavanaugh couldn't begin to imagine. Marcus Chen was in his downtown office reviewing discovery documents for a housing discrimination case when his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but the 703 area code told him it was local. He almost let it go to voicemail, then something made him answer. "Chen Law Group." "Mr. Chen," the voice was accented, urgent. "This is Yusuf Abadi. I own the dry cleaning business at Riverside Plaza. Mrs. Kenyatta, Lieutenant Kenyatta, she told me to call you. The police, they have arrested her." Chen sat up straight, his pen clattering onto his desk. "What, when?" "Right now, just now, they took her out in handcuffs, in front of everyone. She told me to call you immediately." "Is she still there?" "They're putting her in a police car, outside the main entrance." "Mr. Chen, this is wrong. She owns this plaza. She was just doing her inspection like she always does." The officer, he wouldn't listen. He said her ID was fake, he said. "I'm 7 minutes away. Don't let anyone leave. Anyone who saw what happened, I need them to stay. Can you do that?" Yes, but hurry, please." Chen grabbed his laptop bag, his phone, and his keys, already moving toward the door. His assistant looked up, startled. "Cancel my 3:30, he called over his shoulder, "and pull up everything we have on Riverside Plaza. Property records, ownership documents, everything. Send it to my phone." He was in his car in under a minute, pulling out of the parking garage with one hand while dialing with the other. The first call went to his investigator. The second went to a contact at the local news station who owed him a favor. The third went directly to the Metro County Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. By the time he reached Riverside Plaza at 2:32 p.m., A small crowd had gathered in the parking lot. A patrol car sat near the entrance, and through the window, Chen could see Lieutenant Kenyatta in the back seat, still in uniform, still handcuffed, her face a mask of controlled fury. Officer Kavanaugh stood near the driver's door, talking into his radio. Officer Prout hovered nearby, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Chen parked and approached quickly, his Bar Association credentials already in hand. "I'm Marcus Chen, attorney for Lieutenant Kenyatta. I need to speak with my client immediately." Kavanaugh looked up, his expression shifting from irritation to caution. "Your client is being processed for." "For what exactly?" Chen's voice was sharp, professional. "What crime has she committed?" "Providing false information to an officer, failure to cooperate with a lawful investigation, and trespassing." "Trespassing," Chen let the word hang in the air, "on property she owns." "She claims to own." Chen pulled out his phone, tapping rapidly. "Claims. Interesting word. Let me show you something, Officer Kavanaugh." He held up the screen showing the property deed his assistant had sent. "This is the recorded deed for Riverside Plaza Shopping Center, purchased by Kenyatta Properties LLC on March 14, 2022 for $18.2 million. The managing member of that LLC is Lieutenant Imani Kenyatta. Would you like me to show you the business license? The tax records, the liability insurance policy?" Kavanaugh's jaw tightened. "Those can be faked." By someone who also faked a military ID, a Virginia driver's license, and somehow convinced multiple tenants to pretend she's their landlord. Chen's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Officer, I've been an attorney for 15 years. I specialize in civil rights cases, and I have to tell you, this is one of the most clear-cut examples of racial profiling I've ever seen." "That's not what this is." "Then what is it? Explain to me how a decorated Army officer on her own property, conducting a routine inspection, ends up in handcuffs because you decided she didn't look like someone who could own a shopping center." Behind Kavanaugh, several of Kenyatta's tenants had gathered. Yosef Abadi stepped forward, his voice trembling with anger. I told him she's the owner. He wouldn't listen." Keisha Morrison moved closer, her phone still recording. "I showed him my lease. It has her signature on it. He said it didn't matter." Marcus Liu from the fitness center held up his phone. "I pulled up my last 3 rent payments, all made out to Kenyatta Properties." He looked at them for 2 seconds and said anyone could fake bank records. Chen turned to face the growing crowd, his voice carrying. "Did anyone see the initial contact between Officer Kavanaugh and Lieutenant Kenyatta?" Several hands went up. A woman in her 60s stepped forward. "I was in the coffee shop. She was just walking through, looking at her clipboard. She does it every few months. Everyone knows her." The officer stopped her and immediately started accusing her of being suspicious. "Did you hear what he said?" He asked what her business was here. When she said she owned the property, he didn't believe her, even after she showed him ID. Another voice, male, younger. "I heard him tell his partner that she didn't look like someone who could afford a place like this, right before he put the handcuffs on." Chen's eyes locked onto Kavanaugh. "You said that." "I said no such thing." "We'll see." Chen pulled out a business card and handed it to Yosef. "I need contact information from everyone who witnessed this. Names, phone numbers, emails, everything." He walked to the patrol car and crouched near the back window. Kenyatta's eyes met his through the glass, and he saw the mixture of anger and humiliation there. "Imani, don't say anything, not one word. I'm getting you out of here." She nodded slightly, and he saw her jaw clench. Chen stood and turned back to Kavanaugh. "I'm formally requesting you release my client immediately. She's committed no crime. You have no probable cause. And every second you keep her in those handcuffs is another 0 on the lawsuit that's about to bury your department." "She's being processed. Standard procedure." "There's nothing standard about this." Chen pulled out his phone again and dialed. When someone answered, he spoke clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, this is Marcus Chen. I need to speak with Chief Donnelly immediately. It's urgent." He paused. Tell her it's regarding the unlawful detention of an active-duty army officer by one of her patrol officers. Yes, I'll hold. Kavanaugh's face went pale. You don't need to. Oh, I think I do. Chen's voice was ice. You've made your choice, officer. Now you get to live with the consequences. What happened next unfolded with a speed that left Kavanaugh scrambling. Chief Donnelly didn't just call back. She arrived on scene within 12 minutes, her face a carefully controlled mask of professional concern that anyone with experience could read as barely suppressed fury. She walked straight to Chen first, not to Kavanaugh. Mr. Chen, I got your message. Tell me what happened. Chen laid it out in precise, devastating detail. The initial stop, the dismissal of valid identification, the refusal to verify ownership, the handcuffs, the witnesses. He pulled up the property records on his phone, showing them to the chief while Kavanaugh stood 10 feet away, suddenly understanding that this wasn't going to end the way he'd thought. Chief Donnelly listened without interrupting. When Chen finished, she walked to the patrol car, looked through the window at Lieutenant Kenyatta, and closed her eyes briefly. Then she turned to Kavanaugh. Uncuff her, now. Chief, I was responding to a suspicious person call. I said now, Officer Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh opened the car door. Kenyatta stepped out, turning so he could remove the handcuffs. The moment they clicked open, she pulled her hands forward and rubbed her wrists, her face still professionally blank, but her eyes blazing. Chief Donnelly approached her carefully. Lieutenant Kenyatta, I'm Chief Sarah Donnelly. On behalf of the Metro County Police Department, I apologize for what's happened here today. This should never have occurred. Kenyatta's voice was quiet but sharp. Your apology is noted, Chief, but it doesn't change what your officer did. In front of my tenants, in front of people I do business with, while I was in uniform. I understand, and I want you to know. Do you understand? Kenyatta's composure finally cracked slightly. Do you understand what it's like to be treated like a criminal on your own property, to have your identification called fake, to be handcuffed and humiliated because some officer decided you don't look like you belong? The crowd had gone silent. Even the traffic noise seemed to fade. This was the moment, the raw, unfiltered truth of what had happened, and everyone felt it. Chen stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. Chief, we need to talk, privately, with Lieutenant Kenyatta present. They moved into the plaza's management office, Kenyatta, Chen, Chief Donnelly, and at Chen's insistence, the plaza's head of security, James Mitchell. Mitchell was a former police officer himself, 26 years with Richmond PD before retiring and taking the security director position. He'd been off-site when the incident occurred, but he'd rushed back the moment his team called him. Chief, Mitchell said, unlocking his computer, I need to show you something. He pulled up the security system interface. 6 camera angles appeared on screen, each showing a different view of the plaza's main corridor. He clicked on camera 3, set the timestamp to 2:14 p.m. and pressed play. They watched in silence as the entire encounter unfolded. Kenyatta walking through the plaza, her stop at the dry cleaning shop, her conversation with Yosef, her pleasant interaction through the window with Keisha, her professional demeanor, clipboard in hand, clearly conducting business. Then Kavanaugh appeared on screen, approaching her with purpose. Mitchell adjusted the volume. The audio was crystal clear. They heard every word, the initial stop, Kenyatta's calm explanation, Kavanaugh's refusal to believe her, the dismissal of her identification. And then at 2:27:43 p.m., just before the handcuffs went on, Kavanaugh's voice, quiet but captured perfectly by the system's directional microphones, speaking to Prout. She doesn't look like someone who could own a place like this, probably casing it for someone else. You know how they do. Chief Donnelly's face drained of color. She played it back. Once, twice, 3 times. Each time the words were undeniable. Mitchell clicked to camera 5, showing the moment the handcuffs went on. Camera 2 showed the crowd gathering, the tenants trying to intervene. Camera 6 captured the walk to the patrol car, Kenyatta's face visible in profile, professional mask, firmly in place, even as she was being perp-walked out of her own property. Chen let the silence stretch. Finally, he spoke. "Chief, I'm sure you can see what we're dealing with here." "I can," her voice was hollow. "This isn't just a bad stop. This is racial profiling, false arrest, violation of civil rights, unlawful detention, and defamation. All captured on high-definition video with audio that a jury will hear and understand immediately." "Mr. Chen." "And it's not just civil. Depending on how the U.S. Attorney's Office views it, there could be federal charges, deprivation of rights under color of law. 18 U.S.C. Section 242, that's a federal felony." Chief Donnelly sat down heavily. "What do you want?" "What I want," Chen said carefully, "is for Lieutenant Kenyatta to be made whole, professionally, financially, publicly. What I want is for this to never happen to anyone else. What I want is accountability." Kenyatta spoke for the first time since entering the office. "I want Officer Kavanaugh fired. I want him to never wear a badge again. And I want this department to answer for how someone with 3 prior complaints for racial profiling was still on the street, still making stops, still deciding who belongs and who doesn't." Chief Donnelly looked at her, and for a moment the professional mask dropped. "You'll have it, all of it. I give you my word." "Your word isn't enough." Chen pulled out a legal pad. "Here's what's going to happen. 1. Officer Kavanaugh will be terminated effective immediately. 2. His law enforcement certification will be revoked. 3. This department will enter into a consent decree with federal oversight. 4. There will be a settlement, a significant one. And 5. This video will be released publicly so everyone can see exactly what happened here today." Chief Donnelly looked like she wanted to argue, to negotiate, to buy time. But she was smart enough to know she had no leverage. Not with that video. Not with those words. Not with a decorated army officer in uniform who'd been handcuffed for the crime of inspecting her own property. "I'll need to bring this to the mayor's office." "You do that," Chen said. "In the meantime, I'll be filing formal complaints with Internal Affairs, the State Attorney General's office, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and the Army's Inspector General. Lieutenant Kenyatta is active duty military. An assault on her isn't just a local matter." The chief's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face went even paler. "The story's already on the news." Chen smiled thinly. "I called them 17 minutes ago." The next 72 hours moved with the inevitability of a landslide. The local news segment went viral within 3 hours. By evening, it had been picked up by national outlets. By the next morning, it was international news. The footage, particularly the moment when Kavanaugh's words were played for viewers, sparked immediate outrage. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened an investigation on day 2. Not a preliminary review, a full investigation. They sent a team of 4 attorneys and 2 investigators who set up operations in a conference room at the Metro County Government Building and began pulling records. Every stop Kavanaugh had ever made. Every complaint filed against him. Every time Internal Affairs had cleared him with minimal investigation. The pattern emerged quickly and damned everyone who'd looked the other way. The Army's Inspector General moved even faster. An assault on an active duty officer in uniform while conducting legitimate business wasn't just a civil rights issue, it was a military readiness issue. Within 24 hours, they'd assigned a full-bird colonel to oversee a parallel investigation. The colonel showed up at Fort Belvoir, reviewed Kenyatta's service record, immaculate, 12 years of excellence, and then drove to Metro County to have a conversation with the mayor that left the mayor visibly shaken. The mayor's office scrambled. Press conferences were held, promises were made. Chief Donnelly, to her credit, didn't run from it. She stood in front of cameras and admitted the department had failed. She announced Kavanaugh's immediate termination. She announced a top-to-bottom review of internal affairs procedures. She announced mandatory bias training for every officer in the department. It wasn't enough. The City Council convened an emergency session. The NAACP demanded a federal consent decree. The local chapter of the ACLU filed a brief supporting Chen's inevitable lawsuit. Business leaders, including several other property owners in commercial districts, issued a joint statement expressing concern about how their properties were being policed. And then the other complaints started coming in. People who'd been stopped by Kavanaugh over the years but hadn't filed formal reports because they didn't think anyone would listen. A black doctor stopped outside his own medical practice. A Hispanic business owner questioned while opening her restaurant. An Asian American tech executive detained in a parking garage while walking to his own company's office. 23 additional complaints were filed in 4 days. 23 people who'd been treated exactly like Lieutenant Kenyatta, but hadn't had the resources, the documentation, or the platform to fight back. The U.S. Attorney's Office announced they were reviewing the case for potential federal charges. Officer Pruitt, who'd stood by and said nothing, was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The entire department's body camera policy was suspended and redesigned after an audit revealed that footage from 3 of Kavanaugh's previous questionable stops had mysteriously been corrupted or lost. On day 8, Marcus Chen filed a formal lawsuit, $15 million in damages, federal civil rights violations, state law claims for false arrest, false imprisonment, assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation. Named defendants included Officer Kavanaugh personally, Officer Pruitt, the Metro County Police Department, and the county itself. The filing was 127 pages long. It included transcripts of the security footage. It included sworn statements from 17 witnesses. It included Lieutenant Kenyatta's military service record, her property ownership documents, and a detailed timeline showing exactly how Kavanaugh had decided she was suspicious the moment he saw her. The press coverage was relentless. Every major outlet ran stories. Legal analysts appeared on cable news to discuss the case. Civil rights organizations held rallies. The video of Kenyatta in handcuffs, still in uniform, being walked out of her own property played on a loop. Public pressure became overwhelming. The city council voted 7-0 to authorize settlement negotiations. The mayor personally called Lieutenant Kenyatta to apologize, a conversation that was cordial but brief. Kenyatta had nothing left to say to elected officials who'd overseen a system that allowed Kavanaugh to operate unchecked for 8 years. On day 14, formal settlement talks began. The conference room at Chen's law office was deliberately chosen neutral territory, but Chen's domain. Lieutenant Kenyatta sat at one end of the table in civilian clothes, her military bearing still evident. Chen sat beside her, flanked by 2 associate attorneys and a paralegal. Across from them sat the county's attorney, the city's risk management director, and an external counsel brought in specifically for this case. The county's attorney opened with a number, $750,000. Chen didn't even respond. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were news clippings from 16 different countries. Lieutenant Kenyatta's case is international news. The video has been viewed 47 million times. You're not offering $750,000 to make that go away. Mr. Chen, we asked for $15 million. We can prove every dollar. Lost business reputation, emotional distress, violation of constitutional rights. And that's before we add punitive damages for Officer Kavanaugh's deliberate, racially motivated conduct. The external counsel, a seasoned negotiator from a national firm, leaned forward. Let's be realistic. No jury is going to award $15 million for a 20-minute detention that resulted in no physical injury. Kenyatta spoke for the first time, her voice cold. No physical injury. I was handcuffed and arrested on my own property, in uniform, in front of my tenants, my clients, my business partners. I've had to explain to my commanding officer why military CID was asking questions about my arrest. I've had potential investors pull out of deals because they're concerned about my legal issues. My reputation, built over 12 years of military service and 3 years of successful property management, was damaged in 20 minutes because your officer decided I didn't look like I belonged. The room went quiet. Chen continued, and that's just Lieutenant Kenyatta. You want to talk about what happens when the other 23 complainants file their lawsuits? Because they will. They're all talking to attorneys now. Some are talking to my office. The pattern is established. The documentation is clear. Your exposure isn't $15 million. It's north of $50 million, and that's before the DOJ finishes their investigation. 3 hours of negotiation followed. Numbers moved. Conditions were added. The county's team huddled repeatedly, made phone calls to the mayor's office, returned with new offers. By hour 4, they were at $2.26 million, with additional terms, mandatory reforms including revised complaint procedures, independent oversight of internal affairs, quarterly bias training with testing requirements, body camera policy overhaul with strict retention requirements, and a provision allowing federal monitors to audit the department for 3 years. Chen looked at Kenyatta. She sat silently for a long moment, then nodded once. "We have one more condition," Chen said. "Officer Kavanaugh's law enforcement certification is permanently revoked, not suspended, not pending review, revoked. He never carries a badge again." The county's attorney hesitated. "We don't control state certification." "Then you recommend it, strongly. Or we walk, and you can explain to the mayor why you let a $2.26 million settlement fall apart, because you wouldn't commit to ensuring Kavanaugh never does this to anyone else." They got the commitment. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later. Officer Brett Kavanaugh was terminated for cause, with his personnel file flagged to prevent hiring by other departments. His law enforcement certification was revoked by the state board after a hearing where Chen presented the security footage and testimony from 5 of the other complainants. The board's vote was unanimous. Officer Dalton Pruitt was suspended without pay for 90 days and required to complete a comprehensive ethics training program. His body camera footage from the incident became required viewing in the department's revised training curriculum, shown as an example of what failure to intervene looks like. The Metro County Police Department entered a consent decree with DOJ oversight. An independent monitor was appointed with authority to review policies, investigate complaints, and recommend discipline. The department's Internal Affairs Division was restructured with civilian oversight. But perhaps most significantly, the case became a touchstone. Law schools used it in civil rights courses. Police academies used it in training. News outlets referenced it whenever similar cases emerged. The phrase, "She doesn't look like someone who could own a place like this," became shorthand for the kind of casual racial profiling that happened every day, usually without consequences. Lieutenant Imani Kenyatta returned to duty at Fort Belvoir. She continued managing her property portfolio, though she hired additional management staff to reduce her time spent on site. The plaza's tenants remained loyal. Several told reporters they'd seen the real Lieutenant Kenyatta that day, the one who stayed calm under pressure, who followed procedures even when she had every right to explode, who showed the kind of discipline that had made her a successful officer and businesswoman. 6 months after the settlement, Riverside Plaza held a community event. Local business owners, residents, civil rights leaders, and even some police officers attended. Chief Donnelly spoke briefly, acknowledging what had happened and what had changed. Lieutenant Kenyatta spoke last, her words measured but powerful. "What happened to me happens to people every day. The only difference is I had resources, I had documentation, I had witnesses, I had video. Most people don't. They get stopped, questioned, humiliated, and they have no recourse. That's what we need to change, not just here but everywhere, because until we do, there will be more Riverside Plazas, more people who don't look like they belong. More officers who think their assumptions matter more than someone's rights." The crowd stood and applauded, and in that moment something shifted, not everywhere, not completely, but enough to matter. 3 months later, Brett Kavanaugh applied for a security job at a shopping mall in a neighboring state. His application was denied when the background check revealed his termination and certification revocation. He appealed, claiming the decision was unfair. The mall's attorney sent him a link to the video and suggested he not pursue it further. He didn't. In the end, accountability looked like this: a $2.26 million settlement, a revoked badge, a department under federal oversight, 23 additional investigations opened, policy reforms that would affect how hundreds of officers did their jobs, and a decorated Army officer who'd stood in handcuffs on her own property but refused to let that moment define her or go unanswered. Justice moved slowly, but sometimes, when the evidence was undeniable and the pressure was relentless and the courage was real, it moved. And that had to be enough.